Okay, good to go. Woo! Okay, so in Northern Europe in the early 15th century, painting was a medium among many others. Elaborate metalwork in gold and silver, jeweled enamel designs of devotion, illuminated manuscripts, stained glass, textiles from the East, intricate ivory and wood carvings, colossal sculptures in stone, and the most luxurious and expensive medium of all, tapestry. But in the 15th century, something happened. Painting leapt ahead of all other art forms in terms of what it could describe. Gold could only ever be gold, marble remained stone, tapestries remained thread, jewels were gems, and illuminated manuscripts were contained within texts. However, by the 1430s, a single art form could mimic all these materials by using just one medium. Painting had developed the ability to accurately portray all other modes of artistic expression by precisely recording how light hits a multitude of surfaces. Gold was no longer described by gold leaf, it was described by color. Painting had become the authority in the accurate representation of life, confined to a pictorial reality protected by the frame. The surface within the frame, previously reserved for the divine, surrounded by gold, seen here in the Wilton diptych from 1395, instead began to include items that furnished everyday life, such as brass pots, towels, jugs, carved benches, fire screens, and candlesticks, seen here in the Marode Altarpiece from 1428 and attributed to Robert Campin. Painting's new ability to produce highly naturalistic images that included objects and spaces the contemporary viewer inhabited and handled meant painting became a powerful device in the promotion of thoughts, ideas, and doctrines, greatly aided by its ability to reproduce well in the advancing technology of print. However, the evolution in pictorial representation created by the artist was in danger of eclipsing the glory of the often religious subject matters they depicted. Were viewers worshipping those figures represented in the painting or the paintings themselves? Concerns which later led to the Reformation in the beginning of the next century. The emergence of painting as a leading and persuasive medium also inevitably altered the status of its practitioners. As rising individuals who were capable of powerful pictorial communication, artists began to appear within their works in the form of signature, image, or even both. Painting becomes a conscious orchestration that is controlled by the artist, who for the first time is advertised as author of a pictorial reality yet to be witnessed in Western art. Jan van Eyck is one of the first painters to sign his work. Earlier works of art were assigned to a workshop, and no individual specified as author. Yet 9 paintings signed by Van Eyck survive, including this one, a self-portrait, ensuring his reputation endured through positive attribution of works. When one signs a work, one is simultaneously thinking of the past, present, and future. The artist consciously records themselves as author of the pictorial reality they have manufactured, insistent they are recognized and remembered. This lecture seeks to understand the work of Van Eyck in light of the advancement in painted representation, the arrangement of form and color within the frame, and the artist as author. I also want to briefly consider the work of Van Eyck in relation to my own, by way of sharing his influence upon me as an artist, to encourage all of you to access these works as inspiration to your own in a time in the future. We don't know when it is yet. To begin to fully access Van Eyck's work, it is useful to understand the shift in painted representation that occurred in the beginning half of the 15th century. Here I shall borrow David Hockney's method of explanation through image which he uses in Secret Knowledge, Rediscovering the Lost Techniques of the Old Masters, published in 2001, and a fantastic book, should anyone be interested. These three images are painted 130 years apart, and although a simplification of progression, they are useful when visualizing change. Giotto's brush is still closely related to the Byzantine medium of mosaic. Definite line and shapes of color reveal the features, although a strong expression and emotion is clearly expressed. Masolino conveys softer features of even tone and a turban that convincingly sits upon the head. But when we get to Robert Campin's Portrait of a Man, something has clearly changed. The image looks modern. We can imagine meeting this man and can animate his features in our mind. We are given much information that we recognize as true to life, facilitating a greater personal connection with the sitter. An improved understanding of how light hits the surface seems to have been achieved by artists in the early 15th century. Forms are no longer portrayed within line, they are instead described through tone. Forms dissolve into shadow under low light, creating an image of greater naturalism. A nose is a tricky form to cultivate. It is a feature that projects from the surface of the face and is therefore a good form to observe when assessing the handling of light. In Campin's painting, Portrait of a Man, from around 1435 and in the National Gallery's collection, a strong light creates a deep shadow under the nose, which stretches with confidence toward the corner of the mouth. The shadow has been seen. It is not grasped at. It is fully understood. The skin above the eyes has a believable weight, gained from age as the elasticity of the skin fades. A rising confidence in the use of shadow to describe form began to spread from northern to southern Europe. Leonardo, an artist greatly influenced by the northern European painters, clearly demonstrates his improved understanding of light in these two paintings, from 1476 and from 1503 on the right. The image on the right allows tone to describe the bottom of the nose, whereas the earlier image on the left still relies on line to define form. These leaps in representation undoubtedly reflect a greater understanding of light. It is, after all, light that allows us to see. So if we can understand how to accurately describe its effects, we will produce an image that we recognize as consistent with nature. However, it is important to mention the dazzling qualities of light replicated by northern painters was greatly aided by a new medium. Oil began to replace egg tempera as a binding agent. Its application meant the blending of color was much easier, and artists could produce works of rich and varied tone in comparison to the chalkier effect of a yolk-based medium, which continued to be used in Italy, seen here in the Sienese painter Sassetta, The Funeral of St. Francis, from around 1437. With oil, paintings could be reworked, adjusted, rather than be restricted by the fast drying time of tempera. Artists could look again and work with the paint to achieve desired effects, rather than race against time to complete forms in tempera or in fresco, which was painted in sections as the pigment dried into the setting plaster. It was a common misconception that Van Eyck invented oil painting, a myth begun by Vasari in his Lives of the Artists, published in the 1550s. Oil was used in earlier centuries, but it became the main medium for painting in the north during the first half of the 15th century, and its luminous qualities and workable nature were surely in part responsible for what became described by art historians as the ars nova, the new art. However, Hockney believes the representational shift he recognizes through images is a consequence of a new technology. He declares that by itself, oil is not enough to explain this change. Hockney convincingly argues the sudden shift in representation was because artists could utilize the benefits of projected images, made possible by the lens, a tool he believes was used much earlier than previously accepted. 17th century artists, such as Vermeer, this is his music lesson from around 1662, are widely acknowledged to have used the lens as a visual aid in the form of the camera obscura, But in Secret Knowledge, Hockney makes the case that lenses were used much earlier, around the time of Van Eyck. Concave mirrors can project an image when used with a strong light. Hockney suggests their appearance in paintings, such as Van Eyck's Arnolfini portrait, is itself evidence they were used. Secret Knowledge was a sensation when it was published in 2001, and Hockney was hugely criticised for his suggestion that artists used image projection as apparatus as early as the 15th century. Art historians were in uproar over what they saw as an accusation that the old masters had cheated. But what seemed to be lost in the heat of the debate was that Hockney was saying the lens was used only as a tool, not as a way to make the image. As Hockney says, optics do not make marks, only the artist's hand can do that. And anyway, it is unlikely mirrors and lenses have the sophistication to project clear images that could be easily traced. It would have been much more likely artists used the projected image to plot distances between the features of a sitter to rapidly achieve a likeness, providing a useful economy of time. But much more significant is how invaluable it would have been for artists to see an image of the world projected onto a two-dimensional surface. As Hockney says, to see optical projections is to use them. To witness how the world organizes itself in light, color, and form is to understand how to replicate it. Until we see it, we can only imagine it, and our imagination inevitably has pictorial flaws, which could manifest as inconsistencies in the physics of space or descriptions of form or surface. A projected image onto a stretcher, such as a piece of paper or prepared panel, would allow the artist to see the world within the frame, an invaluable device that reorganizes vision for consumption. As a 21st century citizen of the Western world, many of us live our lives through the frame, whether on our phones, laptops, or televisions. But the frame is an engineered fragmentation of reality that harnesses and prepares the world for representation. We have become very accepting of the frame as a way of seeing the world. Used in painting, photography, and cinema, it has become an effective solution to much visual communication. The frame solves the impossible task of replicating our vision by focusing it in one direction. It is the frame that shows us space, visible through its limiting quality. Without its boundary, space infinitely expands beyond comprehension. It is a device that exists within our world to enable us to see another. The frame has been a continual focusing device throughout our history. The prehistorical frame encased the view from inside the cave or within the landscape. The more recent frame is the structure of a window or door, and perhaps the 15th century frame became the limits of a rectangular surface that contained a projected view of the world that could be modeled and manipulated by the artist. But it is this sudden ability to see the three-dimensional world confined upon a two-dimensional surface that may well have accounted for what Hockney recognizes as a different look. To investigate this further and understand why people were so outraged at Hockney's suggestion that artists such as Van Eyck may have used projections as visual aids is a whole other lecture, debating how we understand our experience of the world and quantify the talent of the artist. So perhaps we can return to this another time. See how long we're locked down for. To get back to Van Eyck, let us consider the Ghent Altarpiece as a prime example of this new dawn of representation. It is also the first definitive painting Van Eyck is known to have worked upon alongside his brother Hubert van Eyck. The Colossal Altarpiece was begun by Hubert sometime in the 1420s, but he died in 1426, leaving his younger brother Jan to finish the job between 1430 and 1432. When open, as seen here, the altarpiece is composed of two distinct registers. The lower panels comprise of a consistent landscape depicting the adoration of the Lamb of God, who, like Christ, bleeds and is sacrificed for our sins. Historical and biblical figures enter from both sides and are contained within the outer panels. In the panels above, Christ is seated between the Virgin and St. John the Baptist, flanked by angels and Adam and Eve, who also reside in the heavenly tier to show that they too can be forgiven for their sins. To give you an idea of scale of this piece, Adam and Eve are pretty much life-size. The Van Eyck brothers would likely have consulted a theologian to ensure the altarpiece effectively conveys the numerous religious references it contains. The static painted image was also designed for the performance of display. The Ghent altarpiece had a sophisticated hinging design on the frame, which meant the altarpiece could be manipulated to suit the days of religious significance. The emphasis or meaning of the altarpiece could be shifted through the opening, closing, or folding of particular panels. It may also have observed Lenten practice and been covered with white or grey cloths for the 46-day period of mourning preceding Easter. One can imagine the implication of this period of concealment, the anticipation of seeing the image again in all its glory as the sensational return of colour emerges from behind the covers and doors. We are so used to the idea of painting as a fixed object, continually on show upon the wall, it is difficult to grasp what a performative medium it would have been in the 15th century. When the Eucharistic Mass was performed in front of the Ghent altarpiece, the priest presented the bread and wine before the backdrop of the painting, visually aligning them with the sacrificial lamb. The iconography of the altarpiece would have been in ritual partnership with the actions of the priest, theatrically increasing the intensity of religious practice. The donors who gifted the altarpiece were a wealthy, childless couple. Without heirs to pray for their salvation during Mass, their generous donation of the Ghent altarpiece was their ticket to salvation. They are depicted in the lower exterior panels in great detail. The raised moles and visible veins upon Judicus Vige's face, and the delicate pins that keep his wife's head covering in place, portray the level of observed detail retained in paint. Statues of saints reside in the central panels, the fabric of the church in our world. These statues portray a monochrome technique called grisaille. Painting again flexes its muscles, this time mimicking sculpture, an achievement the carved medium cannot return. The exact authorship of the Ghent altarpiece is much debated among scholars, who are undecided as to which brother painted which panel, but it is generally accepted that Hubert painted the three main figures of the Virgin, Christ, and St. John the Baptist. All have been dressed in a divine uniform of colour. Blue, red, and green have been used to great effect to define each figure, and the yellow of the golden halos balances the spectrum. The blot-coloured robes seem to have been made in unison for the occasion of this painting. The hem of each coloured robe is finished in the same design of pearls, gems, and gold. John the Baptist's camel hair clothing can be seen underneath the luxurious robe that covers his traditional dress. He and Mary bracket Christ as they both direct their bodies towards him, their heads in similar positions. Mary's eyes are downcast, but she is prevented from appearing separate from the decis by the green cloth, protecting the book she reads. It is the same green as the adornments that fall below Christ's ear, and the green of John's robe, thus ensuring a visual communion of colour across the three panels that prevents the visual isolation of any figure. The position of Christ is powerfully arresting. His frontal pose is contrasted to the turned figures at his side. It is a traditionally Byzantine pose that mimics numerous earlier representations, this one from Crete and this from the Hagia Sophia in Istanbul from the 13th century. However, his relaxed yet fixed expression possesses an eternal intensity of presence unseen before now. The simple organisation of these figures separated in space is a masterclass in composition, as subtle connections are made through form and colour. The frontal figure of Christ ripples throughout the rest of the composition, as all forms take their cue from his own. The divine line of Christ, the crown at his feet, below the Holy Spirit, Lamb, and fountain are the central focus the rest of the composition turns towards. Supremely conscious in design, angels are arranged around the altar to exactly correspond to the octagonal shape of the fountain below. 4 groups enter from 4 corners. Shadows cast upon the grass frame the upper groups within the landscape and create further lines that direct us to the Lamb, itself under diagonal rays of light emulating from the Holy Spirit. Distributions of red directed by the garment of Christ also structure the other panels. From the red altar the Lamb stands upon, to the edges of the crowds below, to the robe of St. Christopher, seen large in scale on the right, and the red lances and a cloak of a rider on the extreme left. The scattering of colour conceals the rigid order of the composition. The decis is flanked by 2 groups of angels. Those on the right play a variety of musical instruments. The fingers of the organist are believed to be arranged to play a specific chord, and the varied mouths of the choir of angels on the left are supposedly shaped to reflect the numerous harmonies of a 15th century choir. The dogged determination of the artist to imbue the design with attributes of life is further continued in the portraits of Adam and of Eve on the outer panel. They appear within niches as sculpture that seems to have come alive. Clearly after the fall, Adam shamefully covers himself and appears to be vacating his alcove as his foot protrudes from the edge of the frame. Eve holds a citrus fruit, perhaps in an allusion to the bitterness of the fall. These figures are clearly painted from life. Adam's body reflects a time outside the painting, his hands a little tanned compared to the rest of his body, which is toned yet tired from the activity of life. Eve, too, has a contemporary body, which bears a vertical line across the belly, a common feature of pregnancy or post-pregnancy. Hers, too, is a body used in life, cast for a role within the painting, but still wearing the evidence of earthly existence upon the divine pictorial stage. The details Van Eyck includes in these panels and elsewhere are astonishing. The individual hairs on Adam's leg, the stalk of the leaf that is so convincingly held against Eve's groin, her pubic hair seen through the darkness. These details, like many in the painting, would never have been seen by a contemporary audience. They would have been obscured by low light and distance, but the artist worked tirelessly to ensure they were present so they could fulfill a conceptual requirement. The details within the paintings are not there to be seen by the viewer. They are there because they were seen by the artist and are witnessed by God. It is not just the detail that is so overwhelming. Botanists have identified 42 different plant varieties in the Ghent altarpiece. It is the revelatory creation of space conceived by Jan van Eyck after he redesigned the middle panels of the exterior after his older brother's death. Modern technology can reveal that the middle panels were originally designed to house the religious figures in niches, like the ones seen in the lower panels that house the donors and saints. Van Eyck, perhaps liberated by the creative freedom afforded to him after his brother's death, instead painted what I think are the most stunning and exciting parts of the altarpiece. The angel Gabriel and Virgin are represented within a continual space that runs across the 4 panels. God's messenger holds a lily to symbolize Mary's virginity and utter the words written in gold, "Greetings, most favored one, the Lord is with you." Mary's response, "Here I am, the servant of the Lord," is written in reverse and upside down, as if for God to read from heaven. The 2 figures are rather cramped within the confines of a contemporary room. Gabriel's watermelon wings seem to just fit into the space. Windows open onto the scenes of 15th century Flemish life, as earlier mentioned, seen by the artist, but way too small to be seen by the viewer. Light is clearly a subject of interest, as the shadows of rooftops cast triangular patterns, and the long shadows of the afternoon are created by figures in the street, whose clothes are illuminated by the sun's rays. Just so everyone's clear where this is in the painting. If you go back, so that's the kind of painting in full, and you see the black column, and then you can just see it there. So that's where we're looking. And again, that's a close-up. So these figures are kind of teeny tiny figures. The simplicity of the two central panels is stunning. The illusionary shadows cast by the frame are all that cover the otherwise empty tiled floor. Its grid an effective recession of space. Above on the left, a classical style window is divided by a fashionable Corinthian column. Our vision slips through the window and into the air, which one also sees within the room. It has a recognizable atmosphere of light and space. Shadows envelop forms that are also front lit for our benefit, causing the shadows cast by the frame. The right panel encloses the space. Our vision remains within the room as we marvel at a simple still life of a basin and a towel housed within a Gothic niche. The white shape of the hanging towel with its simple blue lines of adornment is so beautiful and such a clever and subtle device of composition. It completes a trinity of white forms supported by the angel and virgin. Inside the altarpiece, Christ conducts the composition, but on the outside, a towel is given the job. It is a stunning vertical contrast to the black column, a light vertical shape that stands in for an outside view in an enclosed space. Its two hanging halves speak to the two shapes of light cast on the wall to the left of the Virgin, just kind of in line with her elbow. These are the kinds of things that gets me excited. The symbolic value of forms within paintings are of course important, but any artist can include a lily to represent the Virgin's purity, but not any artist can discreetly employ a towel to ensure the success of their composition. An obscription on the exterior frame of the altarpiece confirms authorship. It reads, "The painter Hubert, a greater man than whom cannot be found, began this work. Jan, his brother, second in art, fulfilled the weighty task at the request of Judicus Vigid. He invites you with this verse on the 6th of May, 1432, to look at what has been done." It is of interest to think that Jan was considered second-rate to Hubert. No other works are attributed to Hubert, a historical consequence avoided by his younger brother, whose signature ensured legacy. Jan alone is widely considered the master of 15th century painting, even though it was perhaps his brother Hubert who was held in higher esteem during their lifetime. What the Ghent altarpiece offers us is a visual gateway from the medieval to the modern. The Byzantine pose of Christ the Virgin and St. John reflects a tradition of composition that had lasted hundreds of years, yet suddenly religious figures reside within the time they were painted. Gabriel brings Mary the message she is to bear the Son of God in a contemporary room that looks out onto a 15th century Flemish street. This a design of what is to come. Jan begins to depict contemporary life within the religious realm using an unprecedented level of observed details that his brother Hubert had only used to depict the glory of God. After completing the Ghent altarpiece, Jan van Eyck had already served the Duke of Burgundy, Philip the Good, as court artist since the 1420s, and although he continued to serve the Burgundian court until his death in 1441, by 1432, Van Eyck had set up a workshop in Bruges. In 1433, Jan van Eyck painted this, a portrait of a man now in the National Gallery's collection. The handmade frame is painted with an inscription at the top that reads, "Als ich kann," as I or Ike can, a possible pun on his surname, and a personal motto, always written in Greek. Along the bottom of the frame, a signature and date is also painted in illusionistic text that reads, Jan van Eyck made me on the 21st of October, 1433, which was Wednesday. The bottom text runs out of space, a problem we have probably all tried to solve in the same way, as Jan rather inelegantly squeezes the final letters of the month onto the frame. The work is considered a self-portrait and may have been an effective tool when securing commissions. Its small and portable size of only 26 by 19 centimetres meant it could be easily carried by its creator when meeting potential patrons and offered up as evidence of his skill when held up alongside Van Eyck's face to reveal its likeness. The red turban that wraps around the head is also evidence of his skilled rendition of fabric, and the fur collar, a delicate articulation of texture. The statement of completion boasts speed of delivery and makes one think they really should have achieved more last Wednesday. The attention to detail is again astonishing. The slightly bloodshot eyes under lashless lids, watery with strain from the activity of observation. The stubble, a day or two old, peppered with grey. The skin around the eyes sagging with age and folded by bright light and emotion. The lips pursed with static concentration, the light, so real and understood. The intense red of the wrapped red fabric against the darkness of the cheek. A portrait such as this would leave a client in no doubt that its author could deliver an image true to reality, or a reality the client might want to cultivate. Throughout the 1430s, Van Eyck continued to paint with an unrivaled naturalism that brought religious works to life. Some scholars believe, quite literally. In the 15th century, the concept of sin and penance often occupied the mind. The most straightforward way to absolve oneself of sin would be a confession to a priest who would give instruction in penance for the sin. This might merely be saying prayers or could involve a more elaborate routine that entailed going on a pilgrimage. The church attached indulgences to specific shrines, generating further revenue from the faithful's desire to be absolved of sin through intercession with images. When the pilgrim reached their destination, the most sought-after experience was a vision. The vision might occur after intense prayer and meditation before a religious relic or sculpted figure. Van Eyck's Madonna in the Church from around 1438 shows the Virgin and Child within the interior of a church. It was probably originally paired with another panel containing the donors. Just above the Virgin's left shoulder is a statue of the Virgin and Child, flanked by two candles in a niche in the choir scene. The painting could therefore be interpreted as a visualization of the Virgin and Child, which has appeared to the faithful who, through prayer, are fortunate enough to experience the Virgin and Child before them. This distinction between the real and imagined, or the world's eye and mind's eye, is also explored in Van Eyck's Madonna of the Chancellor Rollin from around 1435. Nicholas Rollin, Chancellor to Philip the Good, is seen kneeling in prayer as the Virgin and Child appear before him, perhaps as a vision through religious meditation. The innovative composition respectfully houses contemporary and biblical figures in the same space by subtly separating the earthly figure of Rollin from the Divine Virgin. The tiled floor cuts a discrete boundary, as does the architecture of the arches behind. As often with the works of Van Eyck, none of the figures lock gazes with one another. The angel looks to the Virgin, who holds the Christ child, who looks to Rollin, who looks back to the Virgin, but the horizon connects the heads of Rollin and the Virgin through form, rather than anything else that might be deemed inappropriate or too personal. Rollin is painted as seen. He has a believable presence, whereas the Virgin, generic in appearance, appears as a symbol rather than as a reality. Like the Annunciation of the Ghent altarpiece, the room feels full of air, as light glows from the distant landscape, which provides an opening of great depth that fills the back of the painting. The light is again stunning. Paint is applied in thin layers of oil that describe the interaction of light with a multitude of surfaces. The roundel windows to the extreme left descend in colour and tone as the sky meets the land through the distorting glass. At the very top in the centre, light illuminates stained glass, the tone of colour so brilliantly understood when conveying the level of light that reaches through. This pioneering composition that melds interior with exterior was hugely influential upon other artists. Roger van der Weyden, student of Robert Campin, used a very similar composition for his St. Luke drawing the Virgin, painted shortly after Van Eyck's painting, around 1435 to 40. The Virgin and Child with Canon van der Pijl from around 1434 to 36 is another example of the real and symbolic appearing together. Here, Van Eyck paints the wealthy cleric Van der Pijl, seen kneeling in prayer beside the Virgin and somewhat crammed into the composition. His head almost appears as a support for the elbow of St. Michael. Like the donors of the Ghent altarpiece and Chancellor Rollin, he appears as a person who walked the earth. His unflattering jowls and bulbous veins are features seen and recorded, in contrast to the idealized features of the Virgin. The amount of detail poured into the composition could be overwhelming, but the series of verticals that heavily structure the painting condense the information we consume into sections. The columns, staff, throne, canopy, grey fur over Van der Pijl's arm, flagpole, and sword of St. Michael creates frames and therefore views we can look at in turn. The folds of the flag, its reflection in the shield, and the combination of shapes contained within the triangular frame it forms within the shield strap is just one of many moments to marvel. Van Eyck perhaps includes himself in the composition, seen as a figure in a red turban and blue tunic seen reflected in the shield. So if you kind of go to St. Michael's shoulder in the kind of, and then if you work your way down just to the kind of blue armor, you can see on his kind of bicep. And then if you make your way across to the shield, you should see a blue figure with a red turban reflected in the back of the shield. All these works illustrate religious figures were beginning to appear alongside recognizable contemporary figures within believable interiors. Robert Campin was perhaps one of the first to place the Virgin within a 15th century Flemish interior in the Marode Annunciation, almost identical in design to another Annunciation, perhaps also produced by his workshop. The lilies in the jug upon the table are a beautifully humble still life, framed between the windows that display a complex shutter system. These contemporary interiors perhaps lend content to Van Eyck's later Annunciation, such as Campin's towel and wash basin and view through a window. But the handling of light and space is very different. The light in Campin's painting is not consistent with the source. The shadow around the table is unconvincing as void. The table itself tilts up at an angle that recalls Cubism, but without the understanding of 4 centuries of representation, this painting produced by Picasso in 1909. Campin's pupil, Roger van der Weyden, also follows in the compositional footsteps and pictorial ideas of his teacher, seen here in his Annunciation triptych from 1434. The fireplace and plumped cushions on a long wooden bench repeatedly appear within compositions, as do various other furnishings of contemporary life. Van der Weyden's treatment of space is much more convincing, but this painting is also indebted to another, the Arnolfini portrait, a painting that is something quite different. The Arnolfini portrait is thought to be of an Italian merchant and his wife. The economic wealth of Flanders generated by the trading of textiles, meant the rising merchant classes began to invest their wealth in works of art, previously the sole consumption of the church, state, and nobility. 5 Arnolfini brothers, originally from Lucca, lived in Bruges and traded in textiles during the 1430s. Lorne Campbell's thorough research makes the case for Giovanni di Niccolao to be the most likely candidate depicted in the picture. His wife Constanza was dead by 1433. In 1426, this may well be a commemorative portrait to Arnolfini's dead wife, supported by visual evidence of the lit candle on the left side of the chandelier and the wax residue of a burnt out candle on the right. Don't know if you can see that. It's just kind of 2 little kind of blobs of white. Or it could be a portrait of Arnolfini's second marriage. Many have observed that the distinct figure of Arnolfini, with his long nose, cavernous nostrils, and cleft chin, must clearly have been modelled from life. His pronounced features also appear in a later painting by Van Eyck, which surely must be of the same sitter. Whereas the female figure appears much more generic in her features. Van Eyck perhaps uses his own wife as a model. The hairstyle and headdress of Arnolfini's wife are very similar to a later portrait of Margaret Van Eyck. Van Eyck inscribes on the top and ends of the frame in Greek lettering with the words, this is inscribed above the painting of his wife. My husband Johannes completed me in the year 1439 on the 17th of June at the age of 33, as I can. In the past, the painting has come to illustrate many theories. The work entered the British public's imagination when it joined the National Gallery's collection in 1842, after Scottish soldier James Hay acquired and sold the work in murky circumstances during the Peninsular War. The Victorians thought they were witnessing an astrological medicine man in the act of examining the lines of his patient's hand to determine the sex of the unborn child, or majority of months. The woman was considered pregnant throughout the 19th and into the 20th century, but current consensus is that the lifting of her dress reflects the fashions of the day and reveals her expensive fur-lined clothing rather than a pregnancy. Until recently, the work was also known as the Arnolfini marriage. This title reflected a popular theory by art historian Erwin Panofsky, who considered the work a painted marriage certificate. This interpretation is supported by the joining of hands and the figures reflected in the mirror as registrar and witness, a role also assigned to the presence of Van Eyck's signature above the mirror. However, the real function of the painting may reflect the image-conscious behaviour we are very familiar with as 21st century citizens. Are the Arnolfinis attempting to show us an airbrushed, idealised version of their life, which flaunts only the most positive attributes? The Arnolfinis adopt almost a religious pose. Giovanni's right hand is a few finger movements short of a blessing. They are poised with dignity and class, and are surrounded by objects that cultivate the appearance of fortune, taste, and virtue. Van Eyck made various later additions that have no underdrawing, such as the dog, the candelabra, the carving of St. Margaret oranges, and the shoes. He clearly worked closely with his subjects, responding to their requests to be portrayed alongside their desired attributes, chosen to instill the interest, respect, and envy of onlookers. Sound familiar? One can imagine the hashtags. Love my life, no filter, oranges, terriers of Instagram, ermine fur, winning, so blessed. Oranges would have been imported from places like Castile and would have been very expensive. To scatter the fruit on a windowsill with, in the words of Lorne Campbell, studied carelessness, is to display extreme affluence. The brass chandelier is another expensive object that would have been difficult to manufacture and more commonly found in churches or buildings of the state. The bed, an object then displayed in reception rooms, is adorned with rich red fabric. the curtains of which have been carefully gathered in bunches to hang around the corners. The mirror is surrounded by 10 roundels, intricately painted to describe scenes from the Passion of Christ. A carpet of complex design extends below some casually discarded satin shoes. The labour-intensive nature of the woman's sleeve dictates a process of cut fabric using saw-toothed pinking shears. Its complex edge meets the intricate pattern of the carpet in a marvellous meeting of textures, separated by distance but brought together by the space within the frame. The carpet edge was also later extended by Van Eyck, but not to display a bigger carpet to reflect greater wealth, but so its edge fit into the fold of the green dress. It is again these formal decisions which excites the eye. Much is understandably made of the potential identity of the couple and the functions of the painting, complicated by the reflections of the figures in the mirror and the signature of Van Eyck. But put simply, the Arnolfini portrait is a triumph in the organisation of form and colour within the frame, conveyed beneath soft light. All objects, many probably added at the patron's request, have been incorporated into a systematic design of pairs and lines. The window reflects the frame of the bed. The figures turn into one another. Again, their gazes do not cross, but they are connected through form and touch. Their joint hands hold the energy of the entire composition. If their hands were to drop to their sides, the whole scheme would suffer greatly. They form a vital horizontal, opposite in orientation to the vibrations of verticals that travel across the painting. From left to right, the window frame, shutters, fur lining, pleats of Arnolfini's robe, prayer beads, floorboards, carpet edge, couch leg, brush, bed edge, the pleats and white fur lining of the green dress, and heavy hanging curtain of the bed. The remaining objects are also ordered into line. From the top, the chandelier, signature, mirror, hands, shoes that reflect the shape of the hands, and dog complete a vertical line down the centre. The discarded shoes to the left, dirty from damp conditions, almost punctures the side of the frame as they highlight its limit, as does the triangular feature of the green dress on the other side. The raised hand of Arnolfini, perhaps a greeting to those seen entering in the mirror, or a sacred sign now stripped of significance by time, but still a light shape that is vital to the mechanics of the composition. It connects to Arnolfini's face and to the other hand of his wife. It also prevents the whole area of the painting from becoming a large dark mass, an inevitable consequence of his hand by his side. Colour too plays its part. The green dress is in beautiful contrast to the red bed. Its hue reaches across the painting to the central square cushion, to the glowing oranges which contrast with the purple robe, flecks of dark yellow in its fur trim picked up by the brass chandelier. The blue sleeves of the female figure connect back to the figure reflected in the mirror and down to the revealed blue underskirt by the dog. The felt black hat of Arnolfini, the crisp white headdress of his wife. The whole spectrum is here, but it is subtle and muted, unlike later Renaissance paintings, such as this one by Michelangelo from 1506, where saturated colour is undiluted by shadow. This colour reflects the literal dullness of Flemish life. Small dark rooms as opposed to the open plazas of Italy, where the outside is inside. Colours are not illuminated by Mediterranean light. They retreat into darkness that dims the forms they describe. The many visual resolutions Van Eyck uses to make this work were probably unconscious, born out of his experience and talent, but his signature, above the mirror that reflects the space we are in, is a deliberate display of his intellect. It also illustrates the close relationship he shared with his patrons, who tolerate Van Eyck's blatant intrusion into their portrait As he paints on the back wall, Jan van Eyck has been here, 1434. The signature throws up questions of reality. In what capacity was he here? As author? As figure reflected in the mirror? As a visitor to this space whilst painting the portrait? If Van Eyck wanted us to have an answer, he would have chosen his words more carefully. Unlike his other inscriptions that state he is the maker of the object, here he is present in the object, but in what sense, we do not know. This is a conceptual work that offers ideas, not answers, and we should enjoy not understanding. This painting, like all great paintings, is not iconic solely because of the mysteries it fails to resolve, but because it presents them in a way that is in perfect harmony with the medium it employs. Painting has never been so good, and the frame has never been used so well. These are the things I take back with me to the studio. I always look for how a painting responds to the frame, perhaps because as a painter, I am so dedicated to its form. Roland Barthes writes, "The picture is neither a real object nor an imaginary object." I am continually conscious that anything I paint must acknowledge the surface as an object that exists in the world. I find the most effective way to do this is to mimic its property and repeat the frame. Yet I also want to create something that exists outside the reality of the painted object, and I attempt to do this with colour. Colour dissolves form, creates space, describes light, suggests atmosphere, and affects moods. My experiments with the primaries, often pushed to the boundary of their hue, are in response to the use of colour by the old masters. The spectrum is continually scattered within great paintings. It directs our eye around the surface, linking and separating other hues, often without our awareness. For me, the Arnolfini portrait is a masterclass in how to collaborate light, form, and colour within the frame. Objects are depicted with an astonishing accuracy to life within an impossible space that has been conjured to soothe our senses and confuse our mind. Painting becomes an immersive experience as the inventive play of space opens and closes and projects in and out as it crosses the boundary of the frame into our world. Van Eyck died in 1441. He was already highly respected, and his reputation grew after his death. Van Eyck and other Northern European painters are often eclipsed by the fame of their Italian Renaissance counterparts, celebrated for their classical clarity and calculations of space. Michelangelo is claimed to have said of Flemish art, "It attempts to do so many things well that it does none well." This image of Flemish art, laden with spectacular detail under an observed light that obeys the laws of nature, is only part of the story. The Northern painters are exploring concepts of reality. Italian painters are yet to negotiate. Van Eyck understood how to create a perfect blend of fiction and reality. We register what we look at as real whilst acknowledging its fantasy, a state of being we are all too familiar with in 2020. Thank you very much.